My own daughter-in-law, Veronica, stole my sick husband and my home, claiming I was too old and unstable to care for him. She thought she could win by lying to judges and manipulating her fancy friends. She never knew that for 40 years I directed plays, and my greatest skill was my perfect memory for every tiny, crucial detail. I didn't hire a lawyer. I simply staged a series of public scenes that exposed every single one of her lies, costing her the only thing she truly loved, her perfect reputation. Hello, everyone. I'm Esther, and this is the story of how I used my theater skills to trap my own daughter-in-law and win back everything she stole. Before we dive into this ultimate performance of revenge, tell me quickly in the comments where you are watching from. And if you believe that experience always defeats arrogance, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the final curtain call. My world changed the day my dear husband, George, had a debilitating stroke. My life became focused entirely on his complex, round-the-clock care. He needed me, and I was happy to give him everything. We lived in our beautiful, big family house, the perfect, accessible place for George to stay while he recovered. But while I saw a place of healing, my daughter-in-law, Veronica, saw only a house, a huge prize she could sell. Veronica only cares about her image and her fancy social life, her church groups and her charity boards. She saw our accessible house as something valuable she wanted to control, and she knew she couldn't get it while I was living there and caring for George. She started telling people in her fancy social circles that George needed professional care. I knew she was lying. I was the best professional care George could ever have. I knew his needs better than any nurse. Then, one devastating morning, Veronica executed her cruelest scene. While I was running a simple errand, she had George moved, without telling me, without any warning, to a cheap remote care facility hours away. When I rushed there, heartbroken and frantic, she was waiting. She put on a sad face, performing her role perfectly. "Esther," she said, with that fake, smooth concern, "you're getting older. You're simply too unstable and emotional to handle George's care or manage that big house anymore. We're taking over." She then filed legal papers to seize control of my accessible home, claiming it was for George's future care expenses. That was the line that turned my deep grief into icy, focused anger. She didn't just steal George, she insulted my competence, my love, and my dedication. She treated my life's work, caring for my husband and managing my home, like a simple hobby she could dismiss. She thought my job was just playing dress-up on stage. She didn't know that every great director, when betrayed, uses her perfect memory to write a script for everyone else. A script designed for one final, devastating scene. I decided I wouldn't fight her with dry lawyers or confusing paperwork, the things she didn't care about. I would fight her on her own stage, her precious social life. Veronica's biggest mistake was thinking she could replace my personal, loving care with a signed paper and a monthly check. She knew nothing about George's complex needs, the things I had recorded in my mind every day since his stroke. This information became the list of truth, and I would use it as my weapon. My first act was to create a meticulous record of George's entire routine. I treated it like rehearsing a new play, making sure every detail was perfect. I wrote down: The medicine lines, the exact names and times of all 7 of his daily medications. Missing even 1 minute could make him dizzy or sick. The movement sequence, the specific way he needed to be moved, and the exact position of the support cushion under his left side. This prevented the painful bed sores the doctor warned us about. The comfort cues, the small things that brought him peace, the name of his favorite old radio show that he listened to every night, the exact time I read him the newspaper, and the temperature he preferred his morning coffee. This detailed knowledge, the list of truth, was the performance that Veronica had to replicate. But I knew she was too lazy and too self-centered to have ever learned these things. She only knew how to sign the check for the remote care facility. Next, I needed to identify the targets from my performance. I didn't care about the judge. I cared about the people who made Veronica feel important. I focused on her key social circles: Mrs. Thompson, the leader of her high-profile charity board, and Mr. Clark, her church leader who often spoke about family values. They were Veronica's audience. If they believed her performance was fake, her entire world would collapse. I also made sure I had an ally inside the remote care facility. I called Linda, the only kind older nurse working there. I explained my deep love for George and my worry. Linda, who had seen Veronica visit George only twice in 2 months, immediately sympathized. Linda agreed to secretly confirm to me that Veronica knew nothing about George's detailed care schedule. This was vital. Linda would be my silent supporter, confirming Veronica's cold indifference. I was ready to begin staging my first scene, a small, quiet moment to test the strength of Veronica's lies. This revenge wouldn't need a single lawyer. It only needed a perfectly staged
With the list
question.
of truth memorized, I planned my first simple scene, a small test to see how quickly Veronica's world would react. I chose Mrs. Henderson, a friendly, low-level social friend of Veronica's who was part of her book club, as the first person to hear the doubt. Mrs. Henderson was a terrible gossip, and any question planted in her mind would quickly spread through Veronica's important circles. I knew Mrs. Henderson walked past the local park bench every Tuesday morning. I went there and waited. When she approached, I smiled sadly and started talking about how hard it was to lose my house, but how thankful I was that Veronica was taking such dedicated care of George. Mrs. Henderson predictably gushed about Veronica's devotion and sacrifice. This was my cue. I slipped in the first line of my script. Yes, I know it's hard work. I just worry constantly about this sequential timing of his 10 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. blood pressure medications. It has to be done exactly right, or he gets dizzy and could fall. I hope Veronica is remembering to remind the staff about that specific timing. Mrs. Henderson's face immediately looked confused. The detail was too specific, too professional. It immediately raised a question in her mind. How could Veronica, who works all day, know such small details? I followed it up with a subtle emotional cue. I showed her a photo of my empty family home. It's a shame we had to sell this beautiful, accessible house to pay for George's care. I worry that the money will run out. I left the encounter quickly, my job done. I didn't accuse Veronica of anything. I simply planted the idea that George's care was dangerously difficult and that Veronica's management was questionable. I knew Mrs. Henderson would run straight to the book club and whisper, "Did you know Veronica is managing George's sequential blood pressure timing? It sounds very difficult. I don't think she has the time." My perfect memory for George's actual medication details had created the first crack in Veronica's performance. The important people were now suspicious. The simple gossip from Mrs. Henderson worked perfectly. When I next encountered Veronica, she was visibly stressed and quickly asked me if I was feeling better. She knew my questions had started to spread. This meant it was time for the next, higher stakes scene. I needed to confront Veronica in front of her most powerful audience, the charity board, led by the extremely influential Mrs. Thompson. The charity board was Veronica's key to local social power. I found out they were holding an outdoor meeting at a local botanical garden, a beautiful public stage. I arrived at the garden shortly after the meeting began, pretending to be searching for a rare rose. I walked toward the table where they were meeting, my expression one of deep, gentle concern. "Veronica, darling," I exclaimed, letting my voice be just loud enough for Mrs. Thompson to hear. "I am so relieved to see you. I had a moment of panic this morning." Veronica's face froze. I launched into the heart of my plan. "I just spoke to the nurse, and George is having trouble with his left side rigidity. Did you remember the new physical therapy exercise? The one where they use the red support cushion to elevate his foot 30 degrees for 20 minutes every afternoon? I hope the staff hasn't forgotten. It prevents the terrible dad sores." Veronica stammered badly, completely unable to recall any of those specific crucial medical details. She tried desperately to dismiss me. "Auntie Esther, please. We are in a very important meeting. I manage the finances of the care, not the daily therapy exercises." I looked pointedly at Mrs. Thompson, letting the damaging silence hang. I looked heartbroken. "Oh, I see. I thought you would know those things, dear. They're so important for his comfort and his skin." I left immediately. The charity board members, especially Mrs. Thompson, had witnessed Veronica publicly admit she was completely ignorant of her own father-in-law's daily pain and prevention needs. My perfect memory for medical detail had proven that Veronica was only managing the money, the accessible house she wanted to sell, not the man. The performance of devotion failed spectacularly. I knew Veronica's standing on that charity board was already completely ruined.
Veronica, furious and humiliated by the charity board incident, executed a clumsy, predictable counterattack. She contacted the cheap remote care facility and demanded they ban me from visiting George, claiming I was disruptive and spreading lies. She was trying to legally enforce my silence and separation from George, hoping to prove I was the unstable one. This was a major setback, but I had planned for it. I immediately called Linda, my silent supporter inside the facility. Linda was already worried because Veronica had started blaming the nurses for George's lack of progress. I told Linda about the ban and how Veronica was now trying to frame the good nurses for her own negligence and lack of care. I used my director skills to organize the staff. I talked to the nurses, not as their boss, but as a concerned professional. I pointed out that Veronica was forcing them to work with cheap equipment and without proper supplies, and that she was now setting them up to take the fall for George's poor care. I reminded them that I, unlike Veronica, knew all the legal and ethical protocols to protect them from false charges. The staff were already tired of Veronica's arrogance. They quickly became my allies. Linda and the staff helped me in two crucial ways. The proof of distance. They sent me simple, dated visitor logs showing that Veronica had only visited George for short 15-minute periods in 2 months, proving her indifference and absence. The new script. They confirmed that Veronica consistently told the staff not to call her unless it was an extreme emergency, proving her emotional separation and desire to ignore George's daily needs. This information was crucial. Veronica had physically separated me from George, but she couldn't separate me from the truth. I now had proof of her negligence and her emotional distance directly from the facility she thought she controlled. The staff were now my secret audience, watching Veronica's final collapse unfold. Veronica's most prized and difficult to win audience was her exclusive book club. This group was critical for her intellectual and social validation. I knew she was hosting the next meeting at her house. This was the perfect, intimate stage for the climax, where I would destroy her entire reputation in one simple scene. I needed a simple excuse to be there, and I found it. I had loaned Veronica a rare, antique copy of an old play script years ago. I called her, sounding entirely normal,
and asked if I could stop by to retrieve the book as I needed it urgently for a personal project. Veronica, too vain to admit the book club was meeting, simply told me to pick it up at 3 p.m., right in the middle of their gathering. I arrived at 3 p.m. sharp. I walked into her beautiful, crowded living room, playing the role of the slightly flustered, sweet old woman. I apologized profusely, explaining I didn't know they were meeting. As I searched for the book, Veronica tried desperately to rush me out, only introducing me as George's wife. This was my moment. I addressed the group, letting my voice ring clearly, using my director's skill to command the room's attention. Please forgive me, ladies. I am just so terribly worried. I need this book to distract myself from George's new severe depression. The book club members, who loved high emotional drama, immediately grew silent. I continued, forcing Veronica to perform. Veronica, darling, please tell them how you handle it. Tell them what you read to George from his favorite old radio show to get him to smile. You read to him every evening, don't you? Veronica looked utterly terrified. She had no idea what her father-in-law's favorite radio show was. She only knew his care was outsourced. She stammered, saying, I tell him about my day, Aunt Esther. I let a single, perfect tear fall and said, Oh, I see. I thought the nurse told me he only responds to the shadow nose at 7 p.m. Perhaps I remembered incorrectly. I picked up my script and walked out, leaving total silence in my wake. Veronica had been publicly exposed as cold, emotionally illiterate, and completely absent from her husband's life. The book club audience, her most valuable asset, had witnessed the truth. The fallout from the book club meeting was immediate and devastating. Veronica's meticulously crafted social image exploded. Mrs. Thompson from the charity board called one of the book club members, confirming the negligence. The gossip spread through the community like wildfire. Veronica didn't love George. She only loved his house and his mine. I became the beneficiary of the gossip. People stopped whispering about me being too emotional and started praising my strength. My phone began ringing with quiet, sympathetic calls from people who respected my fight. They all confirmed that Veronica's reputation was crumbling and she was quietly removed from social events and charity board meetings. Veronica attempted a clumsy final counterattack. She used a community social media group to post a long, passive-aggressive message about my erratic behavior and how she was causing her so much stress during her grief. I countered her performance with professional documentation. I didn't reply to the post. I simply sent a single anonymous message to Mrs. Thompson, the charity board leader. The message contained the visitor logs from the facility, proving Veronica's absence, and the photographic proof of the remote, cheap location she had moved George to. I included a final note. Ask Veronica why she chose the facility that cannot handle a stroke patient's daily physical therapy needs. This shifted the narrative from emotional gossip to life-threatening negligence. My work was complete. I edited out her lies and replaced them with undeniable, cold facts.
Veronica's social reputation was completely ruined, but she still controlled the house. I needed to force her to relinquish control legally and emotionally. The only person left who held immense moral weight in her life was Mr. Clark, her church leader, a man who preached family duty and integrity. I knew Mr. Clark held quiet counseling sessions every Thursday afternoon at the church library. I arranged to be there at the same time, pretending to be organizing old Sunday school props. Mr. Clark saw me and approached me with gentle concern, already knowing about the widespread rumors. I didn't speak ill of Veronica. I performed a scene of personal, deep spiritual grief, sharing only my deepest worry about George's soul. Mr. Clark, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I don't worry about the money anymore. I worry about George's loneliness. He's paralyzed and can only communicate by squeezing my hand. I need to know that Veronica is talking to him about our life, our memories, and his faith. I paused and looked him straight in the eye.
Veronica is a good woman, Mr. Clark, but I worry she's confused. I know she thinks the left side rigidity is just a physical problem, but I believe it's really caused by his emotional isolation. I just wish she would talk to him about his favorite memory, the time they went fishing at the old river, just to remind him he is loved. Mr. Clark listened, his face grave and troubled. He saw the genuine, raw love in my eyes, and he understood the immense emotional complexity of George's care. He knew Veronica had no idea about the left side rigidity or the fishing story. My perfect memory exposed her deep spiritual and emotional negligence to the highest moral authority in her life. He realized that Veronica's betrayal was not just financial, it was spiritual. Mr. Clark did not contact Veronica's lawyer. He did something far more devastating. He called Veronica and asked her to come to the church for a private meeting about her spiritual conduct. He didn't accuse her of stealing. He accused her of failing her husband's spirit and living a life of public hypocrisy. He told her that her place in the community was a lie built on cruelty. Veronica, facing the loss of her spiritual and social lifeline, finally broke. She realized that I hadn't just filed a paper, I had convinced every audience that mattered that her entire life was a performance of lies. She was completely isolated. She called me directly, crying and defeated. She wasn't fighting for the house anymore. She was begging for her shame to end. I was calm and direct. "Veronica," I said, "you moved George. You will bring him back immediately. You will sign the papers transferring the house back to me, and you will pay for all the moving expenses immediately. Only then will I stop performing." She agreed. Within 1 week, she signed the legal papers, transferring the accessible home back to me, and paid the fines for the inadequate care facility she had chosen. Her social world had already collapsed. She lost her charity board position, her book club membership, and the respect of her entire community. My revenge was complete. I ruined her reputation, the only thing she truly loved. 2 months later, the chaos was over. Veronica was gone, having moved out of town to escape the shame. George was back home, resting in his familiar, accessible room. I sat beside George, reading him the newspaper, just as I used to. I held his hand, and he squeezed mine back, a simple squeeze that meant more than any complex line of dialogue I had ever written. I knew every detail of his care, the medication timing, the physical therapy, the jokes that made him smile, all thanks to my perfect memory. I looked around the accessible family home. It was mine again. The victory wasn't just in the paperwork, it was in the restoration of our dignity and peace. My theatrical skills, which Veronica mocked, had been the perfect weapon. I had proved that a simple director, armed with nothing but observation and memory, could defeat the strongest form of greed and arrogance. I closed my small notebook, the list of truth. I realized my retirement was the most important role of my life. I had lost a daughter-in-law, but I had secured my husband, my home, and my ethical legacy. Never too old to write a final perfect scene.